Okay, this one's going to be about the posterior forearm, and let's get started on page 113. So you can see that there's two layers of muscles in the posterior forearm, and what's nice about these muscles is that if you look at the origin, they're all the same. So any of your posterior forearm muscles have the same origin, the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. And if you look at the actions or even just their names, they're all extensors. So our posterior forearm are full of extensors originating at the same place. So let's move to our first one here, which is the brachioradialis. So the brachioradialis in this image is actually kind of obscured. It's a muscle that lies right between the anterior and posterior compartment of the forearm. So if you are sitting there and you're hold your arm so that the thumb is facing up, like you're doing some kind of robot move, I don't know. But if your forearm, actually, let me show you the picture here. So you're in this position. If you kind of do this action where you are pushing down this arm here with force and then trying to resist and push up with this arm, you'll see the brachioradialis work. You'll see that muscle pop up. On the diagram here, you can see that it's larger. Here's our brachioradialis muscle. And so you're going to find this squarely between the flexors and the extensors. On the model, it's this one right here, right? So if you remember from the past lecture, this is your PF. So this is pronator teres. So these are your flexors. Here's brachioradialis, and then beyond that would be your extensors. That's why it's sort of in this mid, right between the two compartments of your forearm. All right, so brachioradialis inserts in the styloid process of the radius. So you can see in this image that goes all the way down to the very end of your wrist, right? So this is where the styloid process of your radius would be. So it's the entire length of your lateral forearm, and it flexes the forearm. So I have to say that I was saying that the posterior forearms are all extensors except for this guy. This guy I usually in class introduce as a flexor, but because it has an origin that is the same as your extensors, it has been put into this box. But it is a flexing of the forearm. The flexing that it does is in a mid-prone position, to be a little bit more specific. So if you look at this picture where this person's arm is in a mid-prone, it's not prone, it's not supinated, it's mid-prone, like you're shaking someone's hand. This is what this muscle does. So if you're going out to shake someone's hand and that upward shake, right, you're kind of flexing your elbow, you're flexing your forearm, that is the action of brachioradialis. All right, so let's move on. So that's kind of the weird one in this box. It is a flexing muscle, but it has the same origin. So let's move on to our extensors, our true extensors. So we have extensor carpi radialis longus, and we have extensor carpi radialis brevis. So again, extending our wrist, one is long, one is short. So our first one here is extensor carpi radialis longus. This is our extensor carpi radialis brevis. Both doing the same thing. Both, remember the word carpi, if it has the word carpi in it, the insertion is metacarpals, and they're going to extend and also add abduct, right, moving the wrist away from the midline. Let's look at the extensor digitorum. So this extensor digitorum is running down the very posterior middle part of your forearm. So the forearm, if you just looked at the very middle of it, that's where extensor digitorum is. So again, digitorum, if it has digitorum in the name, it inserts onto digits 2 through 5. Okay, so that's where your insertion is, and it's going to extend the wrist in digits 2 through 5. This muscle is on the model, this one right down the middle here. And what's nice is that you can see that we have the tendons of this muscle that are visible. So some of you guys might be able to see these as you wiggle your hand on the back of your palm right there, on the back of your hand. You can see those tendons. The next one is going to be your extensor digiti minimi, which is a fun one. Let's see, where is extensor digitorum? Here is extensor digiti minimi. So extensor digiti minimi, your minimal digit, as you may have assumed, is your pinky, so digit 5. So this is a small muscle. Looks like it's actually part of extensor digitorum, but it is separate with one tendon that goes just to digit 5. So it's just going to extend digit 5. extensor carpi ulnaris, next one over, right? So it's going to, carpi means that it inserts on the metacarpals. It's going to be on the ulnar side, so not only extends, but it can medially deviate or adduct the wrist. Lastly, on your extensor side, that superficial is sort of an odd one. It's way up here. It's the anconeus. So the anconeus is a synergist of the triceps brachii. It's going to help to extend the forearm. It's small, it's weak, but it does help the triceps brachii there. All right, so those are our superficial muscles of the posterior forearm. So that's brachioradialis. This is, so in class we would go through the posterior side here. So this guy right here, this is your brachioradialis. Then our first one in to the extensor side is extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis, extensor digitorum, extensor digiti minimi, extensor carpi ulnaris, and then anconeus is way up here by the elbow. So this area here would be the olecranon. Okay, so if we look deeper, right, we have our superficial muscles have been removed, and we have a large muscle called the supinator. Okay, the supinator inserts onto the radius. That should not be a surprise because it supinates, or it turns that radius, and the action is what the name says, right? And then we have these muscles. I memorize this with S-A-E-E-E. So we have supinator. Next to that, we have an abductor pollicis longus. We have an extensor pollicis longus. We have an extensor pollicis brevis, and extensor indicis. So you may have noticed that we have 3 pollicis muscles in a row. These are muscles that they're going to insert onto the thumb. And so when you look at the insertions, they're all dealing with digit 1. So except for the last one, right? So extensor indicis refers to your index finger. So it extends the index finger. And this muscle is small, very deep, but a long tendon inserting onto digit 2, extending digit 2. So these 3 muscles in a row, they actually form a feature called the anatomical stuff box. So let's show you this here. So all the muscles with pollicis in the name, the tendons are going to insert onto the thumb, but form this little depression here. So this is really called the anatomical snuff box. And so you can see that on your own hand if you were to extend or abduct your thumb. All right, so those are the muscles of your posterior forearm. This is the deeper view on your model. This really large one be your supinator, then your abductor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis, extensor pollicis longus, and then extensor indicis. What we can also see back here is our extensor retinaculum. All right, so this is a little diagram that you guys can fill in. This one over here, this is going to be our superficial view, right? And this one over here, this is going to be our deeper view. So I know your lab manual also has images that you can label from the images prior. So I'm going to leave this to you guys to work for homework, but I do want to point out that you can see the superficial muscles here of the posterior forearm, and then you can see these anatomical snuff box muscles superficially on the lateral side of your forearm. So we have 1, 2, 3. These 3 muscles are all inserting onto the thumb. Okay. All right, so then let's save this for another lecture. And one last thing before we conclude this segment is just the intrinsic muscles of the hand. So I wanted to let you guys know that I do not require you guys to know the individual intrinsic muscles of the hand, but I do want you to know the groups. So let's look at the first group, which is the Thenar group. So here's the Thenar group. So Thenar group refers to what's on the thumb, and the intrinsic word means that these muscles are both originate and insert all within the hand, whereas other muscles we talked about originated in the forearm, but they insert into the hand. So those would be classified as extrinsic muscles of the hand. Intrinsic muscles of the hand have origins and insertions in the hand itself. So we can see we have abductor pollicis, we have flexor pollicis brevis, and we have other ones in your that's not pictured here, opponens pollicis and flexor pollicis brevis. Adductor pollicis is not pictured here either. But you don't need to know them individually, just know them as a group. So the base of your thumb here is going to be the thenar group. You do need to know the actions, so you need to know that this group of muscles abduct, oppose, flex, and adduct the thumb. Basically everything except for extend. And then the hypothenar group is going to be the same group of muscles on your pinky. So it's going to have an abducting action, flexing action, opposition action of digit 5. Again, you don't need to know the individual names, but you need to know the group and you need to know the action of the group. Just a nice surface anatomy image for you before we leave. So the thenar group was previously known as the thenar eminence, and you can still say thenar eminence, but this is this meaty part of the base of your thumb. So these group of muscles here, which move the thumb, right, are going to be the thenar group. The hypothenar group, or hypothenar eminence, is going to be this region here, right? So we have a muscle mass that's going to help move digit 5. All right, so that concludes our lecture.